Hello everyone, my name is Rahul Drissel, and the end goal of this course is to help you implement AWS Lambda in real cloud migrations by walking you through from scratch on implementation of one real world use case. Because I believe that once you're able to implement one use case and you know how to read the documentation, it should be easy for you to implement any use case scenario in the real world. And that's what I'm going to teach in this course. Quick introduction about me. My name is Rahul Drissel and I work as an AWS solution architect for a Fortune 500 company. I'm 6x cloud certified, including AWS solution architect professional associate and certified SysOps. I have migrated more than 200 applications with Fortune 100 customers, working on large AWS cloud migration program as part of my organization. So quick walkthrough of this course. So this course has been divided into 3 sections. So if you are an absolute beginner who doesn't have any coding experience or doesn't have experience in Python, then you should start from part 1, this video. These 3 videos are going to walk you through on the Python basics that would be used in writing the Lambda function. But if you have fairly good experience in coding and Python, then you can start with part 2. Part 2 teaches you about AWS Lambda. I would specifically recommend to go through the video 4, which talks about basics on AWS Lambda, and then you can go through the rest of the videos which help you create S3 buckets. As you can see, new, delete and list all buckets. Then we'll talk about EC2, how to create an EC2 start stop, and then in the video 7 we're going to look at how to create DynamoDB tables and to put items. But if you're someone who also has experience in AWS Lambda, then you can directly go to the part 3. In part 3 you will see there are 2 videos which talk about the real world use case implementation using S3, AWS Lambda and DynamoDB. So in these 2 videos you will see an end-to-end implementation of AWS Lambda, where we upload a JSON file on S3 which sends a trigger to invoke the Lambda function and which reads the contents from the JSON file and then inserts it to the DynamoDB. So I've got a lot of feedback on this course, and one of the feedback was to add additional real world use cases which will help people looking to implement AWS Lambda in their projects. So I intend to add another use case which would be to monitor and increase free storage of SQL Server failover, which is commonly called as FCA cluster, using CloudWatch and AWS Lambda. So this is one of the use cases I implemented in my project. I will try and update this video before 15th April. So I'm recording this on March 30th, 2022. Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to another video with Rahul. So one of the most important things as a AWS cloud engineer or solution architect that you need is the ability to write AWS Lambda function. So I created this course for anyone who is trying to switch careers and does not have any coding experience or has experience in another programming language but needs to write the Lambda function in Python. So this is the course for you. So in this course, it will have 3 sections. In the first section, we're going to talk about the basics of Python, and we'll have 3 videos here which talk about different elements that are used for writing the AWS Lambda function in Python. In the second part, we're going to use this knowledge to create the S3. So will you create list all buckets, create new buckets and delete buckets using the AWS Lambda function using Python that we have learned previously. Then we're going to create EC2 and start stop EC2 instances using the Lambda function and Python. Then finally we are going to create a DynamoDB table and then do some put items using the Lambda function. And then finally we are going to bring all this together and create a real world use case using S3, AWS Lambda and DynamoDB. So this is the architecture we are going to create. It's a very common industry use case where a user at a retail store and bank enters some detail that's loaded as a JSON file to S3. Once this is loaded to S3, there's an event notification which triggers the Lambda function. It reads the JSON file from this S3 object and then writes to DynamoDB. So this is what we are going to try and accomplish in this course. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is you need to install the PyCharm Community Edition. It's free and you can go to this link. So let me just quickly show you. Okay. So just type PyCharm Community Edition, research, go to this link. Don't download this. This is a professional free trial. This is charge. Go to this, click on download and follow the instructions. If you face any challenges, just type in a message and I can create another video to show how to install this. Okay, once you have downloaded, you should get something like this with the main.py file here. Okay, so now you can just do a new, go and click on this and create a new Python file. Let's name it as demo lambda, and you click on Python file, do enter. Okay, now you have a blank demo lambda file. Now let's see what we need to create. So I'll go back to the slide. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a print function. So this is the most basic function in Lambda. What it does is it just prints the message to screen or any interface. So what that means is, so this is the first let's look at the syntax. So this is the syntax, print, and then you have these rounded brackets. So whatever you put in these rounded brackets and run the print function, you will see the same message that you have within these rounded brackets. So here you will see hello Rahul, or here it can be numeric. So if you put 30.5, it will print your 35. Let's just quickly go and test this out. So I will put some hash. So when you put hash, this Python will not read this and read it as a comment. So I will say print. Okay. Now let's type some functions. So I'll write print. Okay, now it already shows me that it's a function. It's a built-in function. So I click on this. So let me put hello Rahul. Let me run it now. Go to this and run demo lambda. You can see below hello Rahul. Let me try and print another function. Print some numeric value. So run it again. So you can see here 40k. So that's basics on print function. Let's look at the next thing we have to do. So next thing we need to know is, so what I'm trying to highlight is I'm going to highlight about 10 things. Those are most critical that we need to know because they're going to be used in Lambda functions extensively. The second part is variable. So what variable does is basically it's a container for storing values, floats or integers. So say you want to store 30. So you put x is equal to 30, right? And now the x is storing 30. Or you can then later change it 20. So the x will store 20. Or you can also store a string. So here I have a variable named demo and I stored high. So if I print demo, it will give me whatever value is stored equal to that particular variable. So the good thing here is you don't need to declare what kind of value you're storing, whether it's a string or numeric. So now let's go and see some of this in action. So again, I put 2. So variable. So let me quickly show you. Let me put x is equal to 30 and then another y is equal to hello. Okay. Now let's just print this and see what we get. So I do a print function, and right now in earlier we had put in the exact value that, so we had put in hello Rahul. Here we'll just put the variable and it will print the value of that variable. Okay. So here you can see once I just to print it will show that what kind of function. So it's here showing on the right here showing as function. So now let me just do y. So it will show that y variable we have already declared, and let me just run it now. So here you can see x, when I did print x, so these two it's printing from here. Now for this one, when I did print x, I got 30, and when I did print y, it shows hello how are you, which was stored here in this variable. So I have not put the exact string or numeric. I just put the variable and it will type that. Now let's look at the third one. So we have the user input. Sometimes we need to ask the user to provide you inputs which you can then print. So here like you have the school name, so they have this school name as variable, and then this is the syntax for user input. So input, then you put input, and then you put these curved brackets and within those apostrophe. So whatever input that user provides, that would be stored in this school name, and whatever string that you put inside these inputs apostrophes, that will show to the user. So let me just show you what I mean. So say input and say just put a variable as k, store this value in the variable k. So input is already showing you that function. So name of your school. So you can see whatever I'm writing here, this will be displayed to the user. And then then he can put, and the value that he enters, that would be stored in the variable k. So let me just do print k. Okay, now let's just run this function. Okay, now whatever I had here within this input function saying name of your school, now it's waiting for the user to input that value. So let me say DAV, and it print, and it stored that DAV value in this k, and then I did a print k, and you can see he has put the DAV here. So that's how you gather the user input. Now sometimes what you need to do is you need to print these variables and strings in the same line. So say you want to say, okay, the name of my school is, and then you ask the user to provide input. So he says DAV, then you just print that DAV. So you have and then you ask the second student, the name of my school is, and then he provides input, and then you print that. So you have the string and the variable in the same line. And if to do that, you can use this for dot format a comma b. So if you only have one variable, then you just have a. If you have two, then you can just have a comma b. Just copy it here, dot format, the fourth one. So grade input, I've asked the user your grade. Okay, now I ask section to do, so you provide the input is section name, and then I will print that whatever values he is given. My grade is, so I put these curly brackets here, and section is, and then I just do this. So I do a dot format, and I put in whatever variables you have. So I had the grade comma section. Okay, now I do print. Okay, this is giving me from the previous one, so let me just put it DAV. So now here he's asking for your grade. So let's say 7th grade, section is A. So here you can see it prints whatever we had here. My grade is 7, the value which we provided here, and section is A, value it's provided. That's how we use the dot format, where you have to use a variable as a string in the same line. Hello everyone, welcome to the second video on AWS Lambda and Python full course. So in this video, we are going to discuss the various data types and loops in Python. In the part 1, Python basics, in the first video, we discussed about installation of PyCharm, print functions, variables, and user input. In this video, we're going to do a quick intro on data types, then loops, and we'll do a deep dive into dictionary. So data types are basically used for classification or categorization of data items. What that means is it provides different ways in how you can store data and what are the various operations that you can perform to retrieve the data. So there are multiple data types, but for Lambda function, you just need to focus on numeric, dictionary, which is the most important, then string and list. So these are the only 4 types I will discuss in detail, but let's at a high level just know what are the various data types. This is something I've taken from the internet. So you have numeric, you have 3 types. You have the integer, which is the whole number. Then you have the complex numbers, which is say square root of -4. Then you have float, which is the decimal, and the second one you have is dictionary. So what dictionary does is it's a key value pair. So here you can see I have 1 as a key and Rahul as the value. Then I have 2 as a key and John as the value. So if I have to retrieve John, then I just pass on the key as 2 and I get John. This is how you store and retrieve data in dictionary. Then the third one you have the boolean, which is just the true and false. Then you have the set basically store multiple items in a single variable. So here you have fruits, and within that you have apple, banana, and cherry. Then you have the sequence type, which could have strings, list, or tuple. So strings is basically just a sequence of characters, like you have the name Aaron. So what happens is at the backend it's stored not as a character but certain numeric binary value. So for in ASCII the value for letter A is 65. Similarly, you have for each letter in each language alphabet you have some numeric value, and that's how it's stored. Then finally you have the list. The list basically provides you the value by placing it in a sequence. So here you have the square brackets, and the positional value starts from 0. This is 1 and this is 2. So if I have to retrieve the value, so I pass on the value, the list as 0, and I will get Rahul. If I pass on 1, I get John. So it's based on the position. Okay, so we'll discuss discuss in a lot more detail the dictionary and the list. So one thing we need to know is, you will see that when say I'm retrieving data from a JSON object in S3, it might be in form of a dictionary, and now I have to pass the values which say to DynamoDB, which will accept it as list. So what I need to know is what is the kind of data that is getting passed, whether it's a string, a dictionary, a list, and when I insert the data into DynamoDB, what form I need to insert it. To do that, you need to know what type of variable that particular value is. So for that, you use the type. So let me just show you. So here I've created another file, Python Basics 2, and I've just written the comments here just to save time. So now let me put the type, okay, and our variable is t. Now let's just run this. So you can see it's a float. It's 23.5, right? We discussed if it's actions, it will be a float. Now let me change that to something like, say, a dictionary. So I pass on the key example. Now let's test this out. Now you can see class has changed to dictionary. So now this is a dictionary. So the next thing we need to know is loops. So what loops do is they basically sequentially traverse any list or string. So here you can see I have the data as a string length, and I can traverse through each character and print it out. So let's do that. We have for loop. So I'll just say variable L is equal to hello, and now I will use the for loop. So for, we can put any variable, say x, k, p, we can write anything in L. L is the variable that stores this string, and then you put a colon, and then you just need to give 4 or 5 spaces, and it will take it automatically. Let's say print x. Okay, so x is here. It can be any name you can give. Let me just see that it prints all the characters in this string. So you can change this. Say even if I put y and I change y here, it will still print out the. Okay, now just let's use another data type, and let me just make it a list. We'll just see how we can loop through the list. I know you don't know what list is. We'll just get to that. Okay. I just made it into a list with these square brackets. Now let's just run and see. So it types 1, 2, 3. Okay. The next we need to know is the length function, which returns the length of the string. So the syntax for this is len, and then you have these brackets. Okay, so let's go back. Here, say I have variable length, which I put as hello, and then len, and here we have length. Okay, now it has 3 and 5 characters, so it should show us as 5. Okay, but yeah, I think it shows here. It's showing 5, so it's showing 1, 2, 3 for this. Maybe I can comment it so then it doesn't cause confusion. Okay, let me run it again. Okay, now you can see this is the file. So if I change it, hello, how are you? Okay, now it shows 17. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, now let's discuss the string slicing in Python. Basically, with string slicing, you can get a substring from a given string. So this is the syntax. So you have the variable, then you have the start, stop, and step. So just take a look at this A string. We discussed earlier that each character has some positional value. So A would have 0, S would have 1, T would have 2. Now let's take a variable data which stores string John. Now say I want to print J and O. So what I'll do is J is at 0, so I put the start as 0. Then H is at 2, so I put 2, but H would not be included in the stop. And then step means 1 by 1. So J to 0 is 1, so I put it 1. So now let's just test it out. So I have data equal to John, and I want to print out J and O. So data, okay, I have these square brackets, so I put 0, then I put 2, and then I put so I get J. Okay, now let's go to the most important topic for writing the Lambda function, that is the data type dictionary. So how do you recognize dictionary? It will always be in curly brackets. You can see here we have D, which is representing the dictionary, and you have the curly bracket. Then it's always in form of key value pair. So here you have the key, then you have the colon, and then you have the value. So dictionary is always mutable. What that means is, say if you want to add another element or item to this dictionary, what you can do is you can take this, it should be D. So you have variable D, then you put this as the key and this is the value. So this will be added to this dictionary. Okay, but keys are immutable, so you cannot have another key with same one which has another value. Okay, and then we have the nested dictionary. So what nested dictionary means is that within the dictionary you have another dictionary. So here I have taken the same example. You have one as Python. Now within two, what you have is another dictionary. So the key here is books and values are architecture. Then you have AWS and then you have Lambda. So there's a dictionary within a dictionary. So there are three key things we need to know about dictionary. So already discussed some of them, but let's take a look again. So you need to know the items. So the key value pair together are called as items. We already know what are keys. We know what are values. Now it's super important to know how to retrieve a value from key. So I'll show you. So I'll just paste the same example from there. Okay. Now we have a dictionary here. Now let's see how do we retrieve. Say we need to retrieve the value for this key 2. So what are you going to do? T is the variable. Then you put the key that you are supposed to retrieve the value. So in this case, say we are retrieving it for key 2. So we should get 4. We got the 4. Now say I want to retrieve it for 1. Get Python. I've got. Now dictionary also has some inbuilt methods. So now let's say we are trying to get value of all the items. So if I do T stop, I will get items, and if I do run, so you'll see I will get all the items. So the other method it has is, say we'll do keys. Now we'll get all the keys. You see 1, 2, 3, we got all the keys. Now let's say we need the values. So if you type D stop, it will show you all the methods that are into values, and I get all the values. Now let's look at the nested dictionary. Let me just comment this out. So now I have a nested dictionary here. Okay, now let me try and retrieve the value for this key 1. So let me do print, and I do the variable name int, and say I have the key as 1. So this is in the nested dictionary, so it should give me Python. Okay, so I got Python here. Now let's do it for 2. So I got this whole thing because that's what's expected for the key 2. You can see it here. Now suppose I want to get it for AWS. Okay, so I type 2 and then I type the value as AWS, and I should get Lambda. So I get Lambda. So this is how you can retrieve very specific values in a nested dictionary, and it also has the same methods that we saw earlier on the items, keys and values to retrieve specific elements. Hello everyone, welcome to the series on AWS Lambda and Python full course. This is the third video on Python basics and the last one. This will cover list and functions. So in the first video we discussed about print function, variables, format and user input. The second one we focused on data types, loops and deep dived into dictionary. This one will cover list and function. Okay, so what are lists? Lists are basically created in Python using the square bracket. They can contain multiple data types like integers, strings as well as objects. The elements in a list are indexed with 0 being the first index. So let's take an example, look at the example on list. So here you have a list and you can see the square brackets. Then you have different data types, you have integers, then you have strings, and the first element in the list would be 0. Okay, so how can you retrieve the values in a list? You can do that by using the slice method. So here if you are trying to retrieve say 4, so you start with 1 is on position 0 and 4 is on 1. So you have the start 1, then stop. So this is the only element you want to retrieve. Then you will put stop as 2. Here we have the for. So the stop element, if you have that as 2, that is not inclusive. And then you have the step. Step is whether you want to have in step 1 or step 2. So if you want to have 2, then after 4 it will print out 6. So now let's take a look at the nested list. So what nested list does is that you have, like here you have the position argument as 0, index as 0, and then you have the index as 1, and within this 1 you have again 0, 1 and 2. Now how we can retrieve? By positional value, what we discussed here, and you can also use for loops to retrieve the values. Let's take So I am now on the PyCharm, and I've created another file, Python Basics 3. So let me just copy this list here, paste. Okay, now I have the list. Now let's say we want to print Anisha and Ayush. So let's see what is the index for Anisha. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Right? Take a variable k as l, then I put the square brackets. So the first one I need to put is 4. I put a colon. But what you have to see is the end, where we end. It's not inclusive. So we have to take the next one. So we'll have to take 6 here, and then the step is 1. So go and print k. Now you can see it's printed Anisha and Ayush. Now another thing we can do is, if we just remove the stop and step, it can still print this value Anisha. Okay, this one. So now it's printed Anisha. If I make it as 5, if I just want to retrieve Ayush from this list, and it is 5. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. Now another way that we can do this is using the for loop. Okay, hope we remember the syntax for for loop. We can put any variable, say numbers in L, put a colon, numbers. So you can see it prints out all the values within this list. Okay, now let's go to the nested list, and I will just copy a nested list here. Okay, now I have a nested list here. You can see with index 0 I have 1, 2, 3, and index 1 I have 4, 5, 6, and then within this list again I would have index 0, 1, 2. Okay, so for this one the index would be 0, 0. Now let's try and print these out. Let me just say we can take any variable name as this, then 0, 1, stop at 1, then so now let's just print it out now. So if we print it out now, we should get 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we got 1, 2, 3. Now suppose I'll just remove this, and as we had earlier discussed, just based on the start we can also print these values out. We don't need the stop and the step. It takes it as diff. Okay, so I get 1, 2, 3. Now say I want to retrieve this particular value from this list. So what do I do? Another square bracket. So for 0 I will get 1, 2, 3, then again 0, and this is 1. Now I should get 2. Okay, I got it. Now say I want to retrieve this 8. So this will be 0, 1, 2, this is 2, and this will be 0 and 1. So this is how you retrieve elements within a nested list. Okay, now let's take a look at the last thing we need to know is on functions. So functions are basically related. Functions are logical tasks that need to be invoked repeatedly. So what does that mean? Say you are trying to calculate a square root, very simple function. So you pass the value, or what we call as the parameter 2, and it will just give you the square with 4. You pass 3, it will give you the value. So what is the syntax for function? So it uses the def keyword, and then you give a function name. So whatever, like square, or say if you're trying even odd, so you just write even odd, and then you pass the argument. So argument would be like x here, but when you put the actual value, say 2, that will be the parameter, and it will return some expression. So it will give you the square of 2 is whatever 4, or whether this is even or odd. Now let's do a quick example. Okay, now let's quickly check how the function works. So first you write the keyword here, and then you write the function name. Say you write even odd. We'll check whether the number is even or odd, and then we pass the argument. This x is the number which we're going to check, colon, and then we if x below 0 equal to 2, then is even, and else the remainder is, when divided by 2, the remainder is not equal to 0, then is, I think I made an error here, divide 2 and remove 6. Okay, that's everything looks okay. Let me try it out. I need to pass the argument with this function. So when odd, we pass 2. Let's try it out. Okay, number is even. We pass 5. Okay, number is odd. So this is just to show you, because we have to use the functions and methods later on, just to give you an idea of how the syntax works. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for the basics on Python. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, welcome to another video on AWS Lambda and Python full course. So this is the 4th video in this series, and this will focus on Boto 3, client, resource, and Lambda function handler. So I'll just give you an overview of what all these mean, and this is going to be a theory lecture only. So in the first part, we discussed on Python basics. We have 3 videos on that. In this part 2, we're going to discuss the basics. Then we're going to focus on creation of S3, EC2, DynamoDB. And in the final part of the series, we're going to do a full-fledged project using S3, AWS Lambda, and DynamoDB. So this is the use case we are going to implement as part of the capstone project. So first of all, if you don't have an AWS account, please go and get a free AWS account. To get a free AWS account, go to AWS free tier, go here and create a free account. That's the first thing you need to create to be able to create the Lambda functions. So once you have that, let's look at some of the most basic concepts on AWS Lambda. So AWS Lambda using Python is based on Boto 3. Boto 3 is the AWS software development kit for Python to interact with various services. So let's quickly take a look. So I'll just search Boto 3 AWS and let me just click on this. So here you can see AWS SDK for Python Boto 3. So AWS SDK for Python Boto 3 makes it easy to integrate your Python application library script with AWS services including Amazon S3, EC2 and DynamoDB. So now it has 2 key features. One is the client. Here you see the client or low-level APIs that provide one-to-one mapping to the underlying HTTP API operations, and then you have the resources API. So let's just quickly discuss what that means. So as it says, client is a low-level interface, and the benefit it provides is that there are for each AWS service operation, it is supported by the client. But the downside is that you have to write a little bit more code. So mostly you'll get a response as a dictionary. So you might have to parse that. The resource is a higher level abstraction compared to the clients. So the upside is that you have to write lesser code. But downside, it's not supported for all AWS service operation. And what's the syntax for this? So here import Boto 3 and then whichever service you are using, say you're using S3. So S3 Boto.client and then you have S3 here. For the resources, it's pretty much same. Only thing you change is instead of the client, you have the resource. Okay. Now let's take a look on how they actually work to get a better understanding. So let me I'm on the AWS Lambda service. So if you don't know, if you are on a different service, just search for Lambda to create function. So let's just name it as sample and runtime. It is going to be create function. Okay, now my sample Lambda function has been created. So you can see here it has some boilerplate code. Let's take a look at what it means. So first thing it does is import JSON. So what is a JSON? So JSON is basically a lightweight format for storing and transporting data. So if you are exchanging data between client and server or between 2 applications, you can use JSON. It's a standard for transferring data between 2 systems. Earlier you used to have XML, now we use JSON. So what's an example? So here is an example of JSON. So you have the employee here and then you have the name, you have the key and you have the value. You have the key and the value. So it transmits data in form of key value pair. So it's something very similar to dictionary that we had seen in the second video of this series, but it's very different in the sense that dictionary is a data type, but JSON is just a way of transferring data. But in a way, the syntax is similar, that it is in form of key value pairs. So how is it useful in this scenario? So you will see in most cases, say you are reading a file from S3 object and inserting into DynamoDB. So when you read that file from S3, the data you get would mostly be as a JSON object. So that's why you need to import JSON to perform certain operations related to JSON in the Lambda function. Now let's look at the next one. So this is def Lambda handler event context. So if you remember earlier in the Python basics, we had learned about function. So how do you know that it's a function? By the keyword def. So you have the def keyword here. Then the next thing you have is the name of the function. So here it's a default Lambda underscore handler, and it has 2 arguments, event and context. So what's an event? Let's take a look. So in this diagram, you will see that a user, when he uploads a file to S3, there's an event notification which would trigger the Lambda Lambda function. So when it triggers the Lambda function, it is going to, then that event can transfer some data in mostly in form of a JSON to this Lambda function. And let me just go back to the Lambda function. And then this Lambda underscore handler function is going to read that event, which is, as I said, in form of a JSON, and then you can perform certain operations on that. So what's this other argument that we have? Context. So context basically just gives some environment details related to that Lambda function. So let me just show you. So these are the context properties. So it's the, what is the function name, what is the memory limits, what is the log group name. So it just gives some metadata related to that Lambda function. Okay, let's go back to the Lambda function, and then you see that it returns some values. So now if we have to write any Lambda function, what we do is you can just get rid of this, and let's see how we can use the resource or clients. So let's say we have to create an S3 bucket. So what I'll do is just do go3 S3 AWS search. You can see it has taken us to this S3 page. Now say we are using client, so I click on client, and in the slide I had shown you that you need to have some basic syntax if you're going to use client. So what you'll do is you will import Boto3 and then start a connection. So this is what it is shown here. You pick up import Boto3 and then you pick the client. Here you are connecting to S3. If you're connecting to EC2, then you use EC2 here instead of the S3. So the Lambda function here. So I just paste it here. Then I look at what is a method or operation that I need to perform. So I go back to the documentation. Say I'm going to create an S3 bucket. So I click on create, and then it gives me some data related to S3. And then what I'll do is I'll look at the request syntax. So here is the request syntax. So I have to copy all these details and provide some values based on, say, like what is the bucket name, what is the location, and here are the parameters that are defined by AWS and what needs to go there. And then you will have some return. So you can see here return type is dictionary, and it gives you some details. It also gives you some examples on how to implement this. Okay, so you can copy the request syntax from here and then just paste it here, and then you can change the values. Here's the one last thing I wanted to highlight. This is the Lambda function handler that I was just showing you here. Lambda handler, what it basically does is, this is something from AWS documentation. The Lambda function handler is a method in your function code that processes the event. So that's what we spoke about earlier. And what is the naming convention? So the naming convention for handler would be lambda underscore function dot lambda handler. So where did this come from? Here you see you have the lambda underscore function, that's the name of the file, and then you have the lambda handler. Okay, this is all I want to discuss. I just wanted to give you a preview of what all this code means before we start writing the lambda function. So in the next video I will do create, delete, and list S3 bucket. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello everyone, welcome to another video on AWS Lambda and Python full course. So this is the fourth video in the series, and this will focus on Boto3, client, resource, and Lambda function handler. So I'll just give you an overview of what all these mean, and this is going to be a theory lecture only. So in the first part we discussed on Python basics. We have 3 videos on that. In this part 2 we're going to discuss the basics, then we're going to focus on creation of S3, EC2, DynamoDB, and in the final part of the series we're going to do a full-fledged project using S3, AWS Lambda, and DynamoDB. So this is the use case we are going to implement as part of the capstone project. So first of all, if you don't have an AWS account, please go and get a free AWS account. To get a free AWS account, go to AWS free tier and go here and create a free account. That's the first thing you need to create to be able to create the Lambda functions. So once you have that, let's look at some of the most basic concepts on AWS Lambda. So AWS Lambda using Python is based on Boto3. Boto3 is the AWS software development kit for Python to interact with various services. So let's quickly take a look. So I will just search Boto3 AWS, and let me just click on this. So here you can see AWS SDK for Python Boto3. So AWS SDK for Python Boto3 makes it easy to integrate your Python application library script with AWS services including Amazon S3, EC2, and DynamoDB. So now it has 2 key features. One is the client. Here you see the client or low-level APIs that provide one-to-one mapping to the underlying HTTP API operations, and then you have the resources API. So let's just quickly discuss what that means. So as it says, client is a low-level interface, and the benefit it provides is that there are for each AWS service operation, it is supported by the client. But the downside is that you have to write a little bit more code. So mostly you'll get a response as a dictionary. So you might have to parse that. The resource is a higher level abstraction compared to the clients. So the upside is that you have to write lesser code, but downside is not supported for all AWS service operation. And what's the syntax for this? So here import boto3, and then whichever service you are using, say you're using S3, so S3 boto.client, and then you have S3 here. For the resources, it's pretty much same. Only thing you change is instead of the client, you have the resource. Okay, now let's take a look on how they actually work to get a better understanding. So let me create, I'm on the AWS Lambda service. So if you don't know, if you are on a different service, just search for Lambda, okay, to create function. So let's just name it as sample, and the runtime it is going to be 9. So create function. Okay, now my sample Lambda function has been created. So like you can see here, it has some boilerplate code. Let's take a look at what it means. So first thing it does is import JSON. So what is a JSON? So here, so JSON is basically a lightweight format for storing and transporting data. So if you are exchanging data between client and server or between two applications, you can use JSON. It's a standard for transferring data between two systems. Earlier you used to have XML, now you use JSON. So what's an example? So here is an example of JSON. So you have the employee here, and then you have the name, you have the key and you have the value. You have the key and the value. So it transmits data in form of key value pair. So it's something very similar to dictionary that we had seen in the second video of this series, but it's very different in the sense that dictionary is a data type, but JSON is just a way of transferring data. But in a way, the syntax is similar, that it is in form of key value pairs. So how is it useful in this scenario? So you will see in most cases, say you are reading a file from S3 object and inserting into DynamoDB. So when you read that file from S3, the data you get would mostly be as a JSON object. So that's why you need to import JSON to perform certain operations related to JSON in the Lambda function. Now let's look at the next one. So this is def lambda handler event comma context. So if you remember earlier in the Python basics, we had learned about function. So how do you know that it's a function? By the keyword def. So you have the def keyword here. Then the next thing you have is the name of the function. So here it's a default lambda underscore handler, and it has two arguments, event and context. So what's an event? Let's take a look. So in this diagram, you will see that a user, when he uploads a file to S3, the S3, there's an event notification which would trigger the lambda function. So when it triggers the lambda function, it is going to, then that event can transfer some data in mostly in form of a JSON to this lambda function. And let me just go back to the function, lambda function. And then this lambda underscore handler function is going to read that event, which is, as I said, in form of a JSON, and then you can perform certain operations on that. So what's this other argument that we have? Context. So context basically just gives some environment details related to that lambda function. So let me just show you. So these are the context properties. So it's what is the function name, what is the memory limits, what is the log group name. So it just gives some metadata related to that lambda function. Okay, let's go back to the lambda function, and then you see that it returns some values. So now if we have to write any lambda function, what we do is you can just get rid of this, and let's see how we can use the resource or clients. So let's say we have to create an S3 bucket. So what I'll do is just do go create S3 AWS search. You can see it has taken us to this S3 page. Now say we are using client, so I click on client, and in the slide I had shown you that you need to have some basic syntax if you're going to use client. So what you'll do is you will import boto3 and then start a connection. So this is what it is shown here. You pick up import boto3 and then you pick the client. Here you are connecting to S3. If you're connecting to EC2, then you use EC2 here instead of the S3. So the lambda function here. So I just paste it here. Then I look at what is the method or operation that I need to perform. So I go back to the documentation. Say I'm going to create an S3 bucket. So I click on create, and then it gives me some data related to S3. And then what I'll do is I'll look at the request syntax. So here is the request syntax. So I have to copy all these details and provide some values based on, say, like what is the bucket name, what is the location, and here are the parameters that are defined by AWS and what needs to go there. And then you will have some return. So you can see here return type is dictionary, and it will give you some details. It also gives you some examples on how to implement this. Okay, so you can copy the request syntax from here and then just paste it here. And then you can change the values. Here's the one last thing I wanted to highlight. This is the Lambda function handler that I was just showing you here. Lambda handler. What it basically does is, this is something from AWS documentation. The Lambda function handler is a method in your function code that processes the event. So that's what we spoke about earlier. And what is the naming convention? So the naming convention for handler would be lambda underscore function dot lambda handler. So where did this come from? Here you see you have the lambda underscore function. That's the name of the file, and then you have the lambda handler. Okay, this is all I want to discuss. I just wanted to give you a preview of what all this code means before we start writing the lambda function. So in the next video, I will do create, delete, and list S3 bucket. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like. Hello everyone, welcome to another video on AWS Lambda and Python full course. This is the 5th video in the series, and this will focus on S3 bucket creation, deletion, and list of all the buckets using Lambda function written in Python. So in the first series, we focused on understanding the basics of Python that are used in Lambda. So we created 3 videos for that. In the part 2, 4th video, we focused on what are Boto3 client and resources Lambda function. We described that in detail. And this video, we are going to focus on creation of S3 buckets. This is what we're going to focus on in this video. So what are the steps we're going to follow to create the Lambda? First, we're going to create the Lambda function. So let's go to the console. Okay, let me just search for Lambda, and okay, we're going to create functions, and we're going to write this create S3 and give it today's date. So 1/03/2022. Runtime, we're going to select as Python 3.8 create function. Okay, now this function has been created. So the next thing we're going to do is increase the timeout limit. Sometimes Lambda function by default has just 3 seconds timeout limit. So you need to increase it to at least a couple of minutes so that it doesn't time out. And the third thing we're going to do is create or enhance the IAM role so that it has the permission to create the resource we are planning to create. So I will go to configuration and I will go to general configuration. So here you can see the timeout limit is 3 seconds. So you need to at least make it 1 or 2 minutes. Let me make it 1 minute. Do a save. The second thing we need to look at permissions. By default, it creates a role. So we need to enhance that. It doesn't have the permission to create an S3 bucket, which we are trying to do here. So for now, I'll just give it full permission. Go to add permission, attach policies, search S3. So I will give it full access. Maybe in a production environment, you might want to limit the access you give, but here I'll give it full policies. So I think it has created that role. Now let me go back over. Okay. So if you don't know what this import JSON, why we're using it, or what is this Lambda handler function, please go to the 4th video. I've described all these in detail to help you understand. So I'm going to get rid of this boilerplate code. The next thing I'm going to do is a search for Boto3 S3 AWS. Okay. So once you do a search, you can go to this page. Okay. Now we're on that page. Now we're going to use client method for writing the code. So I'll just click on client. I just do an import of these 2 things. So again, I have described that in the 4th video. Go back and look at that if you don't understand this. Okay. So now let's see what we need to do. So these are all the methods that are available for client. So I need to search for create bucket. So I'll click on this. It provides you some documentation on what create bucket means. We can read through that. Okay. Now I will go to what is the request syntax. So this is my request syntax, and it tells me what are all these parameters. So ACL, so can ACL to apply to bucket. So bucket, name of the bucket, that should be a string. Okay. It also tells me what kind of data type it needs, and it is a required. So this is mandatory. Now let me just show you an S3 bucket and what are the things we use to create a bucket from the console. So here's my S3 bucket. So if I create a bucket, so I just need to give the bucket name, then I need to give the AWS region name, and then rest of them, ACL permission, they are legacy permission, we don't really need them. So most of things you can leave as default. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing, the request syntax, and put it under this Lambda handler. do a paste. Okay, so I will get rid of this ACL. I don't need that. Okay, so I will create the bucket name. It has to be unique. So let me create S3 demo. I'll give today's name, date 03/2022. I'll put ABC so that it's just unique. Now I need to create bucket configuration. So I need to provide which region it will be created. So mine is AP Southeast 2. I'll get rid of the rest of them. Okay, I've got rid of these and I don't need these as well. So I will get rid of these. Okay, then let's look at what is the response syntax. Okay, so we have given them. So response syntax, we're going to get a dictionary and it's going to give you some string. Okay, so let me just, okay, so I've got a response. Now let's see if our S3 bucket has been created. And let me do a refresh. Okay, so now you can see the S3 demo with today's date ABC has been created. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to delete this S3 bucket. So I'll use the same Lambda function. I'll remove the code and then use the same Lambda function to just save time. Okay, now let's just get rid of this code and we'll go to S3 implementation. Now let's look at the delete method. So the delete bucket, it's here. It gives some details on what it does. And I'd like to look at the request syntax. So request syntax is I'll just copy it here. So what you need, you have bucket. You need to provide the bucket that's required. Expected owner. I don't think I need that. So I will just here, and don't forget to leave the space. Let's see what is our bucket here. I'll just see. Get rid of this. I can do a print response. Do a print and a response. Okay, I do a deploy. Now this should delete my bucket. Let's first look at the response syntax. What's the response syntax going to look like? So it return none. It's not going to give me anything we expected. Also some response metadata. Okay, test. Okay, I've got some response metadata, but I don't know what this is. Anyways, we'll take a look at the S3 bucket, whether it's been deleted. So I see it here. Not going to do a refresh. Okay, you see that it's gone. Now let's do the list bucket. Okay, so let me go back and let me just get rid of this code. Okay, now let's see in the documentation. We'll go back and we'll look for the method list bucket. So here is the list. Okay, let's get some details. Now let's look at the request syntax. So this is the request syntax. Oh, this is the response. Okay, so request syntax is pretty simple. Say just respond client also. Let me do this and go here. Okay, that's all we require. Then let's do a print. Let's get that response, which is the variable here. We deploy and let me do a test. Okay, we have got some metadata. Now let's take a look what is the response we were expecting. So you can see the response structure here. So we'll get a dictionary. If you don't know what dictionary is, take a look at the second video of this series. So you get the buckets, and then the second key you have is owner. Within the buckets you have a list. You can see the buckets are in form of list, where you have the name and creation date. For the owner you have some more. So let's see what we have got. So we can also check this in the CloudWatch. That's much easier to read. So I will just go to CloudWatch and let me go to the log group. Okay, I have the logs corresponding to this log group. Click on this. So this is the latest one, I think. Okay, now you can just take a look at the response metadata. What we get is we're getting a lot of details. So here is the buckets corresponding to what we see here. Okay, sorry. Then we have the name. So this is the first bucket name. Then it's a creation date, and then the second bucket. So we get a lot of details. Okay, based on what we see here. Now just suppose we need only the name of the buckets. So how do we do that? Okay, let's go here. And if you remember in the second video, we had discussed about how to retrieve only specific values corresponding to the key. So let's do that here. We could have, say, a variable k is equal to, or we could name it anything. So we'll say response, and then we'll just write the key name. So what is the key name? So here we need only buckets, right? So I will just put it. If you don't know, as I said, go to the second video and see how you get the value from through the key value pair in the dictionary. Okay, so response, I will get k. So hopefully I should only get the names of the bucket and name of the bucket and the creation date, because this is coming coming as a dictionary deploy, and let's test. Now we have some values. Let's go and take a look at the CloudWatch. It's easier to read. So this should be the latest one. Okay, now yeah, you see much simpler. So you only see the bucket name and creation date and time. Now you're only able to get this. Now suppose what you want to do is you only want to get it for one bucket. So you say you want only for demo 30205 or SFTP POC test. Okay. Now what you see within this is you are getting a list, right? This square bracket, it says that it's a list, and you can see that the way it is structured is you get a list. So how do you get for a particular bucket? Now if you remember when in the second video we were talking about list, how to retrieve the values. You need to retrieve the values from the positional value. So we can add a positional value here once we get the bucket. So we could do like position value 0. So now we've got some value for only a particular bucket. So let me take a look, go back to the CloudWatch and latest one. Okay. So now we should only get only a particular bucket. So you can see now we just have it for one bucket, the creation date and time. So now if I say I put this as 1, so I should, let me just put it at 2. So we should get a different bucket deploy based on the index of that particular test. Okay. Now you can see I got demo 0320. Okay. That's about it on creation of S3 buckets, deletion and list. Thank you. Hello everyone. Welcome to the video series on AWS Lambda and Python full course. So this is the 6th video in the series. In this video, we're going to focus on creating EC2 and start and stop using Lambda in Python. So in the part 1 of this series, we focused on Python basics. Part 2, in video 4, we looked at some Lambda basics. Video 5, we looked at creation of S3, and video 6, we are focusing on creation of EC2. So what are the broad steps? So we'll create a Lambda function in the console. Then we're going to increase the timeout limit. We'll create and enhance the IAM role. The default role that it is created won't have the permissions to create an EC2 instance. Then finally, we'll search for the Boto3 library client and find the relevant method to create the instance. So let me go to the console. Okay, I'm on the Lambda console. So to the create function, EC2 create, let me put S3. This is going to be Python 9 create function. Okay, now this function has been created. So let me go to configuration, general configuration, increase the timeout limit. The default is 3 seconds, so I'm going to make it to 1 minimum. Okay, we go to permissions. So this is the default role that's been created. So I will add permissions so that it can create the EC2 instance. Go to add permission, attach policies, search EC2. I'll give full access for now, but in production you might want to have more granular access. So attach policies. The policies will be attached. Let me go back to the function and let me go to the code. So before we go to the Boto3 and see what is the right method, let me do one thing. Let me go to dashboard and let's see how we create an EC2 instance using the console. So launch instance. The first thing we have to choose is the AMI. So I'm going to just copy the AMID from here, which would be used later. I think I already have it here. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to choose the instance type. So we'll just copy T2 micro. So I've already copied it here. The third thing we're going to go to config details. So we'll leave all the config details as it is. It is going to create the EC2 instance in the default VPC. If you want, you can choose that, but we'll just go for default configurations for now. And then next we go to storage. These are some of the storage details that are taken by default. Okay. Now let's go to Boto3 method. Here I search the Boto3 EC2 method and I click on this. Okay, click on the client. So we use a client for creating this EC2 instance. So just to import of Boto3. If you don't know what this means, go to the 4th video of this series and where I've explained what is client resource, why do we need to import Boto3 and all the concepts related to Lambda. Now I go to function. So I just removed all the boilerplate code here. So we can remove import JSON, we don't need it, but we can leave it as it is. So it imports the JSON library and imports the Boto3. Now we create a connection to the EC2 instance with this method. Now we have the Lambda handler function here defined by the def keyword, and we have the event and context. Now to create the EC2 instance, we'll see what is the appropriate method. So you might have to do a little bit research, just do a Google and see what is the method. For here I can tell you it's the run instance. So this is the method we use. If you don't know, then you can just do a little bit search and figure it out. So it gives you a little bit details on what this run instance does. Okay, so look at the request syntax. So this is the request syntax. You see there are a lot of details here. So we'll leave most of the details default. We'll only put the mandatory details. So let's look at what are the mandatory details. Probably an image ID, instance ID, how many instances we need to create. So let's look at the documentation below. So you can see here for the first one is the block device map. So this is the block device mapping. And if I go to the EC2 instance, this is what we are looking at in terms of block device map. So it's basically the EBS configuration. So here you can see the device name, what is the volume type, volume size. So here you have volume type, device name, then what is the size, volume type. So these are all the details. So leave it default. What we are going to do is we're going to only change the image ID, instance type, and the count we need. And that the reason is that those are the minimum details we need to provide. Those are the mandatory details. So let me just show you. So this is the image ID. So this is the instance ID. So if you don't put any instance ID, it will take default M1 small. But we are going to take the free tier that we copied, and then you can see we have to give the max count. Max count basically gives you the number of instances you want to create, and you have to give the min count. Let me go here and just copy this. So I'm going to create an instance. I'll just paste here. Okay. And the next we are going to copy is we'll leave everything else as it is. So we'll copy the image ID. Okay. And we're going to copy. So depending on which region you are, you might have to choose the image ID corresponding to that region. Otherwise, it might not be available. So just be careful of that. And we're going to put T2 micro instead of the default A1 medium because it is free tier. Okay. Now let's look at the documentation. So this is client and image ID. They should be at the same indentation. Okay. Now the third thing we have to copy is the min and max, right? Because that is a mandatory field. So we'll search for min and maximum. So here is the min and max count. I'm just going to copy it from here and just paste. Okay, let me just fix this and then make sure that you put max and min as 1 and not 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, you'll be creating 123 instances. Okay, here. Okay, now let's look at the response structure. So response structure, it is going to provide us a dictionary. Say this is the response structure, and if we print response, this is what we're going to get. Say now we only want the instance ID that has been created. Okay, so what we are going to do is, so let me go to the function and then just print a response that's here, the variable, and now I just want say this instant ID. Now you can see it's a dictionary. How do we get the value of only a particular key? So we'll have to provide the key as instances, and then we get a list. So within that list we need to provide the index value. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to copy instances from here and go here. If you don't know how to find this value corresponding to the key, take a look at the lecture 2 where we extract the value from the dictionary. Okay, now let's go back to the documentation. So here you can see that for instances we have this list. In the list, the first one that we have is where we get the instance type. So we will have the index value as 0 because this is at 0, and then again within this we have a dictionary, and for the dictionary we'll need this particular key. Okay, so now first through what we have here, we have got this instances, right? So now let's put the value as 0 for the list. Okay, so let me just put 0 here, and next we'll get all these IDs as a dictionary. Now I'll just pick this key and copy so that we get the instance ID, which is here. Okay, now we're going to do a deploy. Okay, now it's deployed the function and I'm going to test. Okay, now it's created an instance ID and it is given you this instance ID. So last is 280. So let's just take a look at the EC2 console whether it's been created. Let me just do a refresh. Okay, I see that this EC2 instance is getting created. So let me just, so it's in the pending mode. You can see the instance ID last 3 is 280. Okay, it's coming up. So it's coming up as running. So you can see the value we got here is 280. That's how you create the EC2 instance. Now let's change the same function and stops this EC2 instance. Right now it's in the running state. I will clean up this code and let's just see what is the go to 3 documentation for stop instance. So here I have the stop instance. So it gives you some details on how to stop. So this is the request syntax. So I will just copy this request syntax. You can see the details of all these parameters. So only thing we require is the instance ID. Let me go here and place all this. So I will get rid of all this stuff, and so instance ID I'll just copy from here. Okay, now let's deploy this and test. Okay, so it's worked fine. Let's see if this EC2 instance has been stopped. Okay, now you can see this 280 is stopping. Now just let's see how quickly we can start this instance. So I'm going to use the same Lambda function. So start here with the start instance. Let's look at the request syntax. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to copy it and paste here. Okay, copy the instance ID from here and go here and just paste the value here. Get rid of the rest of the things. Deploy. Let's test. Okay, I can see that it is not giving me any error. Let me go to the HT instance. Let's see if it stopped. Just do a quick refresh. Okay, pending. Now you can see that it's starting. After a few minutes, I can see it started. So thank you very much. This is how we create EC2 instance start and stop through the AWS Lambda function. Hello everyone, welcome to another video on AWS Lambda and Python full course. This is the 8th video in the series, and in this video and the next we are going to discuss a common industry use case using S3, DynamoDB and AWS Lambda. Let's do a quick recap. In the part 1 of this series we discussed Python basics. Part 2 we discussed creating S3, EC2 and DynamoDB using AWS Lambda Python, and in the final part we are going to discuss the common industry use case. So this is the target architecture we are going to build in this video and the next. This is a common use case across banking and retail industry. So we have a feed coming at regular intervals on S3. So this can be in form of a JSON file, a text file or a CSV. Once this file has been uploaded into S3, it will trigger a event notification that will trigger the Lambda function. So this Lambda function is going to read the JSON file from this S3 bucket. It's going to print that out and then insert it into DynamoDB. So we'll use the S3 that we created in the video 5. So we'll use the same S3 bucket. This is the name of the bucket. And then we'll also use the DynamoDB table that we created in the video 7 using the Lambda function. So this is the name of the DynamoDB table. So you can also create it through the console. That should be okay. So now let's quickly look at some of the steps we are going to follow. So we'll create a Lambda function in the console, increase the timeout limit like we did for some of the previous videos. We're going to enhance, update the IAM role. Then we're going to search for the Boto3 library for either client or resource method. So the new steps that we're going to see in this one is to understand the data type that the response gives once our Lambda function reads the S3 object, and then we'll understand what data format this DynamoDB table expects once we insert the data. So if there is any difference in the data format, then we have to do that conversion. Then finally we'll write the Lambda function to read the data from JSON file and print it. And in the 7th step, probably in the next video, we're going to insert the data into the DynamoDB table. And then finally we'll run the end-to-end use case using the S3 event trigger. So let me go to the console. Okay, I'm going to do a create function and let me name it as S3 DynamoDB, and I can just put as data and going to be Python create function. Okay, now the function has been created. Let me go to configuration and general configuration. I'm going to increase the timeout limit to say 2 minutes. Then I'm going to go to permissions. I'm going to change add permissions to this role, add more permissions so that it is able to access S3 and DynamoDB tables. Add permissions. So add S3 because it needs to access the S3 attach policy. Okay, now I'll add the DynamoDB access. Here I'll give it full access. Attach policy. This is done. Let me go back to the code. So let me get rid of this boilerplate code. I will go to Boto3 and search for S3 method to read that JSON from the S3 bucket. So we'll go here to client. So we'll go to get object. So this is the method. Let's see the syntax, request syntax. So this is the request syntax. So it has a lot of things, but the only parameters that we require is the bucket and and you record the key of that object, and I think that's pretty much it. So let me just let's copy this syntax and just paste it here. And get rid of this stuff. I'll just keep the key and the bucket name. So one thing we need to do is we missed copying the import Boto3, and so that's for importing the Boto3 library and creating a connection to the S3 bucket. So I'll copy this, and so now let's go to the bucket. So what's the bucket name? I already have a sample file. Let me just quickly show you. So it has just 4 attributes. So here's the customer ID, a product named Toffee, and it has address and it has quantity. So I will just upload this file. Okay, now I'll just upload. Okay, so I can see within this bucket I have this sample JSON file. I need the key now, so I'll just click on this, and you can see the key here. I'm going to substitute the key here in this. Now let's see what the response syntax looks like for get object. Okay, so you can see the response syntax. So we're getting a lot of data. So the only thing we're getting a dictionary, but you can see when I go through all this documentation, what I can see is the key thing that we need is this body, which would give all the attributes of that JSON. So this will come as an object data. So this is a dictionary. So we'll pass this key to get that data. Let me go here and let me store that in a variable. So response, the name of the key, okay, and JSON data. Okay, so one more thing we need to do is, if you remember in the video second, we determined what is the type of the response we are getting. So we'll do a type to understand what data type we're getting. So we'll just do JSON data. We'll deploy test event. Here's giving me some syntax error. Let me just try to fix this. Okay, now I think it's created. It's read that file, but it's giving me a response in form of Boto streaming object. Okay, so this is something we have to see what that means. So you can see here in the first step, I didn't understand what this response looked like. So it seemed like a streaming body object. So I just did a quick search. So I'm just trying to show you how I approached it. And you can see the first response I got was exactly what I saw there on the streaming body. So you can see it has given various methods. The one I will use is read. So read at most amount bytes from the stream. So if you don't provide any argument, it's going to read all the data. So one thing we need to check is what is the DynamoDB, what data type is DynamoDB expecting for inserting the data into the DynamoDB table. So that's the format we need to get our response and convert it in the same format. So let's take a look at DynamoDB resource. So here we need to do a put item to put the data into the DynamoDB table. So you can see here it's expecting a dictionary type. So that's what we need to get the output as. So right now it was the Boto response. So we looked at here we saw that we need to use the read method. So that's why we need to change this to the read method, and we just put a comment to what does it convert. You'll just see it's not written what format it converts to, and that's why we have this type. So it will just tell us what format we finally get from this. Convert from streaming. Okay, let me deploy and run it again. Okay, so that, and okay, I think I made a mistake. So I didn't fully copy this. Okay, so now let's try and see what happens. Okay, now you can see the data. So we have customer ID, product Toffee, address, and quantity, but it's converted this into bytes. But we are expecting, or at least the DynamoDB put method is expecting a dictionary. Okay, I can upload only up to 15 minutes video, so I will continue this in the next video. Hello everyone, this is the 9th video in the series AWS Lambda and Python full course. So this is the use case we were trying to implement. This is in continuation from the 8th video. So let me just go to the console. Okay, so we had converted the data from streaming data to bytes. So now now let's see, let me just quickly show you something. So here you can see you can convert the data from bytes to strings and strings to bytes. So what that means, if you remember the second video, we had talked about how when you're transmitting data from say client to server or over two different systems, you would usually convert the JSON string to bytes and then you can convert it back. So the commonly used format is UTF-8. So like you can see here, we have the data in bytes and then you use decode to convert it into string. So let me just copy this, and so you can see we have it in bytes here class, and let me just now convert it into string. So now this variable, let me name it as data underscore string, and B would be the JSON underscore data. So this should work. So we can print it out. We just comment it, and this will be convert data from prime string. Okay, and this should be data underscore string and type. So we should also, let's also just check the type. Remember, our objective is to convert this data into a dictionary so that we can insert it into DynamoDB. Deploy, and I think I got some error. So we should try now. Deploy and test. Okay, great. I think it works now. So we got all this data that we have in the JSON, so it's reading. So now we have converted it into string, but we need to convert it into dictionary. So let me just show you one more thing. Okay, now there's something called as serialization and deserialization of data. So right now we have the data in form of JSON string, so we need to convert to dictionary. So we'll use loads. If you have to convert from dictionary to JSON object, then you will use dumps. So right now I'll just copy this, okay, and let me just here. So y here would be data underscore JSON. So let me call it dictionary, and so variable here would be data underscore JSON string. So this will be data underscore yes. Okay, I think this works. Comment out, just one and convert from JSON string to dictionary. Now let's just test it out. Yes. Okay, I think it works. So we have the class dictionary and we have got the values. So next thing we have to do is now let's we already have the DynamoDB table. Now we need to insert the data. Insert data to DynamoDB. So we had earlier searched that. Okay, let's see how do we create the connection. So I'm going to use the resource for this. So for resource, we need to just first import Boto3. Import Boto3 we already have. Okay. So to create the connection, we can DynamoDB just here. Okay. Now let's look at the method. So method would be to put item. Let's copy it here. Let us paste it here. So we have table.add. So I just need to correct the syntax here. So we don't have any dictionary item in this format, right? We have that in the data underscore dictionary. So let's get rid of this, and item would be for the dictionary. Then we use this. So let's see if it works. Yes. Okay. So I think I have missed one thing here. I have not put the table name. So let me go back to the documentation. So okay. So yeah, this one I have missed. You have to provide the table name. Okay. So what was our table name? We had it somewhere on the slides. Okay. So this is our table name. We just copy here and paste this by users. So it should work now. Okay. I think it might have worked. So let's see if this data is inserted into DynamoDB. So 01 coffee and quantity 4. Let's go refresh our table names. Yeah. Okay. So this is the one which we just inserted. So we have 01. Great. So now I think it works end to end. The only last thing we can do is we can add this as an automated trigger. So I will just add trigger this lambda function, and let's search S3. Okay. So bucket, we have to give the bucket name. So this is the bucket name. All objects create events. Okay. Yeah. So let's do it for all events. So anybody, if it uploads, it gets a trigger. That's fine. Okay. Now what we can do is we can upload another file to this DynamoDB. To the S3 and see what happens. Okay. So I just modified this file slightly. So I just added 02 coffee and 5 and just change the address. So let's now load this to S3. Okay, I'm on the script. So let's do a load here and do a load. so it's uploaded. Okay, so now I just go to the Lambda function. You can see the trigger has been successfully added. The function now receiving events from the trigger. Okay, I'm now back on the table, so refresh, and you can see now a new item has been added. So 02 coffee, and I think that's what we had in the file we uploaded. Okay, this pretty much concludes the entire Lambda and Python full course. There's only a small another video 10 that I'll upload on error handling. I hope you like the course. Thank you very much.